Hi, and welcome back to More Than a Lumpy Jumper with Bobby Davis and Bridge Forster. In 2012, the UN recognised that pursuit of happiness is a fundamental human goal, and they established the 20th of March as International Happiness Day. So, what's that got to do with leadership? Do leaders need to be happy? Should organisations care whether their employees are happy? What impact does happiness have on productivity? Come and have a listen to Being Happy with Happiness.
Are you feeling happy?
I'm not sure. I don't know about happiness. I don't feel sad. I kind of feel just a bit content, maybe. Content, is that the right word? I'm not feeling lots of joy because I'm looking out the window and it's a bit grey and rainy.
I read somewhere in our preparation for this that actually smiling helps. So I'm sat here looking like I probably could do with locking up because I'm trying to grin while I'm talking at the same time. So I will make some attempt, if it makes sense, to be smiling during this recording, but we'll see. That's just made me start laughing. Oh.
I agree with you. I think there was one of the episodes we were talking about faking it till you make it. I think maybe it was the taking up space episode. But I know that there's lots of research into that idea of if you don't feel it, smile, and you can't help but there's some muscle memory, I think, that then starts some of the happy hormones just coming into your blood so that you actually will be happier.
And the thing that I read as well was that the change of facial expression to a smile, it drops the temperature of your blood supply to the brain. That causes pleasurable feelings. I have no, that's the sciencey bit. That's enough from me. I'm taking my white lab coat off now because we know that it's not my favourite pastime, but that's what I read, that it changes the temp of the blood supply to your brain. And that's what causes it. So I guess that also enables what you're saying about the different hormones to make the feeling. So there you go.
Yeah. Have you ever watched the anime film by Studio Ghibli,
I have
Totoro?
not.
It's a children's cartoon, but that shouldn't stop anything. I actually went to see the theatre production of it a couple of months ago, and it was just, that made me happy. It was just so breathtakingly beautiful and really clever. I have to sort of add this in. My nieces and my sister are obsessed with anime, and so have watched all of these things. And so I kind of was trying to feel a little bit like I need to be able to speak the language. So I went to see the theatre production and was just so mesmerised. I watched the movie when I came back, and there's a little part in it where it's a father and two daughters. They're young, like little, and they're scared by the new house. They think it's haunted. And he says to them now, because they're all sort of huddled up, I think there's a storm as well, and it's all a bit creepy. And so he says to them, come on, let's laugh. And he just starts laughing and he gets them to laugh. And he says, you can't be scared if you're laughing. And it's just a really cute sort of link into the same sort of thing that we're saying. But if you haven't watched Totoro, then you should watch it.
We'll need to put that into the links, and I will do exactly that. I think most recently I had a very similar experience watching Wonka. I said Wonka. I smiled all the way through it. And again, just so pleased that I'd been to see it, because in fact, I actually went to see it before my nieces had. And now they're toying with whether they think I'm more like Hugh Laurie, the Oompa Loompa in it, or the Olivia Colman character, the ghastly Mrs. Scrubbit. I'm like, I'm not sure I want to be either, but it makes them laugh and happy just thinking about how ridiculous I would look as either character. So I think that all helps too. So there we go. 2 great films. We'll add them to the links.
Yes, super. Maybe we'll think of a couple of other ones, happy films that we can add on to the list. So that sort of idea of creating a list of things that resources that are happy. When I was in Gaza in 2021 and I was away from home for long periods of time, and it was quite stressful, and I was doing some coaching on manifesting, actually, which was sort of the beginning of my woo-woo journey. And one of the things that we talked about was happiness and what did I want or need in my life. And one of the things that I identified, you sort of go through things. And for some people, it's money. For some people, it's love. They're looking for connections. And one of the things I identified that I wanted more in my life was joy. So one of my tasks was to think about what makes me happy and small things. So I could think big, but also to think small. And then with the small things, to write a list of the sort of small things that brought me joy or made me happy, and to put it somewhere visible so that if I was feeling or couldn't source my happiness or my joy, that would be the inspiration. It would remind me of things that I could do that would fake it till I make it, in a way. And actually, even sometimes just reading the list of things that made me happy reminded me of happiness, and so therefore I felt happier.
Absolutely.
Does that make sense?
So what did you have on your list?
Well, I've still got it. I've got it in my office. And so it was things like having scented candles, having chocolate, having a bath, a bubble bath, going swimming, hugging my husband, getting a hug off the giant, or, the cat, just cuddling the cat. And that's not a euphemism. Or buying flowers, just having flowers in the house, or reading a book, sometimes just sitting and having time to read a book. So little things. And so either I could read the list and it just would make me smile because I'd remember doing those things, or I would be like, okay, so I need to go and light a candle. I think I got through more candles than is absolutely necessary for one person during my time when I was working out there, just because it would be a really simple thing to do to just relieve some tension and just make me feel calm.
I love all of that, because the things that happiness is, I know we started with smiling. That is one of the things that can start to bring the body into action, to feeling better and potentially more joyful. But there's so many of those things on your list that are sensory. So, you talk about smell from the candles and the act of burning them. But there was also quite a lot to do with water in there. And, your wild swimming, but the bath, the shower. I'm very similar. I mean, I wash off the end of a day. I shower at the end of a day to just go, there's a different, especially when I was working full time. It was nurturing, and it made me feel better and happier, like the day had gone and I could actually go downstairs. And like you say, you get your hug off your big bear. I get my hug off my very cuddly little elf. Sorry, Ash. And it says about giving and receiving hugs. For the benefits of mental health, they should be 5 to 10 seconds long. I hugged a friend when I was saying goodbye to her after we had coffee yesterday. And we did hug for at least 5 seconds, if not longer. And when we broke apart, she said, "Oh, that was such a good hug." And that's the thing. The longer it goes on, the better you feel.
Yeah. I actually really do love big hugs because they feel real. And also, of course, that touch. I mean, I think that there was quite a lot of research about in terms of loneliness and the impact, particularly there's been much more research on it because of COVID or because of all of the isolation during the pandemic, that what people were lacking was touch. And I remember when I was single after my practice marriage, and I'd read about this issue of depression linked to lack of touch. And so one of the suggestions was, if you do not have a person to hug you regularly, that you go and get a massage. And so I booked in for regular massages because that was the way that I could get skin on skin touch as well, not just clothed hugs. I'm not suggesting that we all have to get naked with our friends, but there are benefits from both types. But long hugs, they're so powerful. I think that there's a huge potential for research into, sciencey research to find out why and what it does to our bodies. I think that would be super interesting. But we all know anyway, don't we? It makes us feel good. It feels the connection, all of those things that it brings are really powerful.
I don't know if they go hand in hand, but the the whole thing with hugging as well, of course, it's non-verbal. And I suppose I was just sitting here pondering, if you're not somebody who wants to speak a lot, is the better way of going if you want to give somebody reassurance or support or care to hug. And then I'm going, well, I wonder if people aren't very demonstrative in words, I wonder if that then goes through to the body or not. I don't know.
I just wanted to flag that for many people who are neurodivergent, particularly autism, that touch actually cannot
Agreed.
be something that is calming or welcomed. I saw the coolest little badges the other day, which sort of said, not okay with hugging. You can get these really pretty little badges that just sort of say, I prefer to be comforted in different ways. And there were a whole list of things you could choose as to what you preferred over a hug. So yeah, I just think that we need to recognize that while for many people hugging is something that does bring happiness, there are a lot of people for whom it doesn't, and it actually brings anxiety and whatever the opposite of happiness is.
I absolutely agree, and it may well be a really good move for us to actually put that in the resources as to where to get those from, because I've also come across a lovely company with some really, really beautiful badges celebrating neurodiversity called Sugar and Sloth. We can put that in as well, because there's some really cool stuff out there, which is absolutely making sure that we're doing what's right for everyone.
Oh, perfect. Thanks, Bobby. I'll check those out as well, because that might be a resource for future presents for people.
But I have to tell you this story, because my husband is a brilliant hugger. I'm just going to say that. And he does give lots of reassurance in that way. But we did have this conversation once about what I really needed sometimes. And I don't know if this is the same for other people who are listening to this, but I think it goes back a bit to that book. Is it Women Are From Venus and Men Are From Mars? So I might say, oh God, you're not going to believe what happened today at work, tra-la-la. And Ash was much more likely to say, well, what you should have done is such and such. So one day, sort of like trying to keep my temper together, I said, do you know what? I don't need to be told what I should or shouldn't have done. This was what I would refer to as a there moment. All I needed was a, oh, did it? Or maybe even just a hug. So the next time I tried it, I could see him, his little face looking at me and wondering what to do. And he leant forward and patted me on the head and said, there. I nearly killed him. It's like, that's not what I meant. So we do have this joke now. That if I'm going off on one and he comes and pats me on the head, I mean, one, he runs the risk of getting his arm broken, but it does actually make me laugh. It makes me laugh so much. It absolutely diffuses the situation. I had to share that because he'll be chuckling to himself while he's listening to this little git, because he always thought it was very amusing, and he tells everybody as well. Anyway, we digressed. We were talking about hugs. The other thing that I wanted to say, I read some stuff about different foods being mood enhancers. There's all of the health benefits for the things that you're actually eating. But I think you're okay, because the list I read, dark chocolate was on there as a mood improver, and it's been scientifically proven. But it's that thing when they go, one little square of dark chocolate a day will do you good. I'm like, who on earth in their right mind opens a bar of chocolate and only eats one square? That's alien to me. But you can get tiny bars, can't you? Again, there's part of me that just goes, I'd be better off not having it, because it will never be enough if I start.
Actually, I found the idea of those small bars, because I'm the same. I'm not a person who ever has people, if I go to people's houses and they go, oh yeah, I've got some chocolate up here, and it's like, I've had it since Easter, and I'm like, what? How does this is just doesn't compute. But I did get to a point where I realized if I have chocolate in the house, I'll eat it just through greed, not necessarily through need for happiness. I would buy smaller bars, terribly uneconomic, really, but I found that if I just had one small bar and then I would eat that, and that's fine. And then if I wanted some more, I'd have to go and get some more. So I found that was an effective way of sating my need, because I think once I'd eaten a few pieces and then had to stop, I'd be like, okay, yeah, actually, I don't need that more.
I'm sure I really should have known this. And when I read this the other day, it made perfect sense. But, that just a little piece. So this study I was reading around brain behavior and immunity, and that was talking about what sugar does to, the spiking and the dipping in our blood sugar. And so, of course, when you do have a little bit of chocolate as the mood improver, it gives you that hit of serotonin and you feel less stress, etc., etc. But if you overdo it, the dip is that much more, which are the things that can create anxiety, depression, lethargy, irritability, all of the things that Ash will probably be going, yep. Oh, there's another one. Yep, and that one too. And I think I have lived a good part of my corporate life in those spikes and dips. And I don't know why it never made sense to me that when we were always told, little and often, the difference it makes. But now I've stopped doing that and keeping that level of equilibrium, I definitely have more energy and I definitely feel more upbeat. I sleep better. So all of those things, the food and mood, equates to having more opportunity, or there being more of a potential for positivity, happiness, joy, all the things that we're talking about.
Yeah, I agree. I think we're both on a bit of a health kick journey with a view to shedding a little bit of ourselves to get a little bit smaller, and not in a way of shrinking in terms of the space that we take up metaphorically, but actually physically. And certainly I'm feeling exactly the same way. So now I have stopped that sort of peaks and troughs of sugar and food and eating through boredom a lot of the time, I assume. I definitely too, I'm feeling more energy, sleeping better, thinking more about food as fuel as well, a little bit. That kind of brings me on, rather than banging on too much about thinking about weight loss. One of the things that I looked at, and so how we can be happy, or what brings happiness. And when we look at what would I need to be happy, and people go, I need to be a millionaire, or I need a new car, or I want a boat. But actually, when we start to think about what it really, really means, a lot of it comes down to living in the moment. And that resonated with me when I read that, because I thought, the other day I went for a walk, the other bonus of working for yourself, and I saw snowdrops for the first time this year. And there was just this huge wave of happiness when I saw this little clump of snowdrops. I was like, oh my gosh, I love snowdrops because they're a little sign of hope, aren't they? And that made me happy. And then another time last year, I was swimming in a river while I was on a retreat, and I saw a kingfisher. I saw two kingfishers, actually. I'd never seen kingfishers in the wild. And I was in the water and I just saw this flash of blue, and I was like, oh, what's that? I thought it might be a dragonfly. And then when I realized it was a kingfisher, that just this whole wave of emotion came over me of pure happiness, that I was like, I've never seen one before. And this is a really precious moment. And I was so happy that I cried, happy tears. So I think that a lot of happiness is simpler than we think, but a lot of it is about being in the moment and embracing things that are quite simple.
I completely agree. And I think nature plays a big part in that. It's the same for me, and everyone will have their thing. Similar for me, sunsets and sunrise, wherever I am, but just taking a moment at looking at all of those amazing colours in the sky and landscapes has a big effect on me. I had the very good fortune to be out in Argentina last year, and Ash said he'd never known me quieter, because we would walk in somewhere and, we're staying in hotels with lakes and mountains, and I basically watched landscape TV. I would just sit and watch for ages, hours, and felt very, very content. You use the word content, but that's happy. It doesn't necessarily need to be long and loud and large and party-fied. That makes me happy too. But just those quieter, simpler moments. Robins are another one. And then the other day, it popped into my head as you were saying it, was watching my grandson Harry with all of us singing the Hokey Cokey and him dancing. It was just joyous. absolutely joyous. And that costs nothing. I'm absolutely with you in that, drawing into the moments. It's interesting because I know we're doing this episode because we are on the cusp of the International Day of Happiness arranged by the UN. And their theme this year, unless I've got it wrong again, but I believe to be mindful, be grateful, be kind. And I think that those little things, that living in the moment that we're talking about, that is being mindful and then being very grateful for those things that we get to see and hear and feel, and the connection that we have with others. I don't want to get too woo-woo on it, but I think that what you're saying about that being in the moment is absolutely the thing. And so much of us are so busy that we don't spot them.
This living in the moment, Bobby, I'm now linking it maybe into leadership, because I guess there's a question that, do leaders need to be happy to be leaders, or is it just we all just have to suffer all the time through our work? And I just had found a couple of articles about why happiness was helpful to a leader. And a lot of it was linked to this idea of living in the moment. Because if you're happy, it kind of changes your attitude to problems. Because if you're living in the moment and being grateful for small things, it tends to mean that you can be more optimistic. And so your narrative changes when you get problems, for example, because you then see them as opportunities for learning and growth. I'm not suggesting this is always easy, just so I'm flagging that whenever people are sat there going, back in this example I've got, there's no way I'd have been happy about it, or I wouldn't have seen this as an opportunity for growth and learning. But if you are generally and practice living in the moment and being happy generally, you also have resilience when it comes to problems, and this idea of this sort of optimism about how you can approach things. And I do think there's a massive link to gratitude as well, which obviously the Day of Happiness is recognising.
Yes, I've got a couple of things on this actually. So you're referring to it, Bridges, living in the moment. Something that I've read about before, I've read her book, Tara Brach, is radical acceptance, which is pointing to some of the things that you're saying as well about, I couldn't have just seen this as a growth moment with what was actually going on. But she talks about practicing this radical acceptance. And it's based on I think I've got this right, it's based on a sort of like a sub-form of cognitive behavioural therapy, which is called dialectical behaviour therapy. Big words here. So basically what you're doing with the practice and she does mindful practices, meditation practices, but what you're looking for is that it will actually, if you can do this, improve emotional regulation, you've got better coping skills, the resilience piece that you're talking about, actually staying in your window of tolerance rather than blasting off, better comms, you're healthier in your relationships with people. So there's a lot to go at with it. And it's part and parcel of what you're saying, living in the moment. But we have 4 options when we're in those things that are not making us happy, the tricky situations. So option 1 is to try and solve it, make the change so it's not the same problem anymore. And again, I'm not suggesting that that's easy, but it's the option. How would you go about that? Talking to other people about it, voicing it, working it through. Another one is changing the perception of it. So you come at it from a different angle. So it may well still be there because you can't fix it. I'm trying to think of an example of that now, but where I tell you, here's one. It's about the narrative around it. So my mum, God bless her, would have dates in the diary for when people had died. It's not exactly going to help happiness. So I asked her, did she have the dates in the diary of when people's birthdays were? You can see on social media, some people celebrate heavenly birthdays for people. I think that brings them some level of solace. Again, not crying happiness from the rooftops, but it's changing the perception of something. I'm not sure that's the best example, but it's the one I've got right now. You then learn to accept it. So that's that element that we've talked about before, that there are certain things outside of our control. So rather than having something making you miserable that you can't change, you learn to accept it. And there, I'm not talking about staying in dangerous relationships, toxic jobs, harassment, or anything like that. I'm not asking people to accept that's when you need to be getting help and solving or changing situations. Or the fourth one,
Bobby, that's a bit like the acceptance prayer, isn't it? God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.
Absolutely. And then finally, the fourth option, which is always an option, you can just stay bloody miserable and change nothing. I mean, I'm not making that up. That was one of the options when we are accepting, radical acceptance.
Yeah,
you can just leave it as it is. Let me just throw this into the mix as well, because you mentioned the word resilience. And I just want to tie that back. I think that this may well be helpful for leaders. I know it's helpful for me, and hopefully it'll be helpful for you too, Bridge. But you were talking about the things that bring you joy. So the snowdrops, the kingfisher, whilst you're swimming in the lake. You can bring those memories back to mind in a resilience practice where you just sit quietly. It doesn't necessarily need to be a meditative state, but bring to mind those moments of sheer joy. The emotional reaction you had to the kingfisher on the water is a brilliant one for practicing resilience. So you sit and you bring that to mind, all the colours, all the sounds, the feeling of the water, what you can smell in the air. Just try to conjure all of that up. And then the practice is, what happens when I turn the tone down on it a little bit? And then what happens when I heighten it? One's when I almost turn the volume up. I turn the colours up brighter. I make the sounds louder. Or is it slightly more subdued to that? And then find the happy medium and sit with that for a while. And you can bring to mind and actually do that. That's not faking it either. That's actually bringing back to mind all the things that made your body and your mind feel so good about happiness. So again, when you're in a shitstorm, it might not be the first thing that springs to mind, but if you can find the space to actually do that, it quietens the storm.
I'm smiling just listening to you talking about that, actually. It's lovely, and I really like that idea. Yeah, as I said, even when I was talking, just remembering how happy that kingfisher made me, obviously also that made me, I could feel the happiness. I could feel how it made me feel, remember how it made me feel. And the remembering is the same. I remember reading, the brain actually isn't able to tell the difference between a visualization and a memory or an experience. And so actually reacts in exactly the same way to all of them. And so yes, those memories, when you remember being happy, the happiness that you feel is happiness. It's so different to the happiness that you would feel if you were seeing it now. So I love that. I think that's really, really great idea. And when people are sort of saying, oh, well, that's the last thing on my mind when I'm going through a shitstorm. But again, I do think that so many of the things that we talk about in good leadership practice is just that, and it's practice. And so if you have a habit of being able to take time, take a breath, think about happy things, and you have a bank of happy memories, or the list to remind you somewhere you can see it, so that the moment the shitstorm starts, you've in your office or on your computer or whatever, you've got a reminder that there is happiness, that you do experience happiness, that you've got a prompt to go, okay, I need to take 5 minutes. And you know what? Taking 5 minutes in this shitstorm is unlikely to make much of a difference to the amount of shit that is flying around. And obviously there may be some examples of where 5 minutes is not appropriate at that time. But I would say that the majority of issues are not life and death. And so taking 5 minutes and just saying, I'm going to bring some happiness into my life is not actually asking too much. And if you have a practice of that, of dealing with all kinds of issues, then it's more natural, and it's not probably something that you're going to be able to do if you've never done it before, right in the middle of a massive shitstorm. So you need to start practicing now. That would be my tip.
And again, we often talk about the differences about individuals, teams, organisations. You could have a list for each, and then looking at the interweaving. So the fact that mine are very much around dancing and singing and spending time with family are things that bring me often the greatest joy. along with the nature and the pieces that we've actually talked about. So, as you said, a team or an organisation getting naked in a river is unlikely to happen, and maybe not a water fight in the workplace, although I flipping love to do that as well. But find other things that I've seen talked about where happiness does have places in organisations, are things like the volunteering. I see a lot around that now, building organisations that can build connections with community as well as building the community within themselves, as part of the organisation. The giving and receiving, there can be creativity, there can maybe not dance, but again, I saw the other day somebody I know in the organisation, they had been dancing together, and just the difference that it actually made. I know it's not for everybody, but I think that there's something in that. And then the other thing that I was just thinking, which I thought was interesting, my lovely HR geek squad, who I'm part of, one of the members on that was saying the other day that they're interviewing for the job, but part of their title is happiness. So it was asking us what we thought about that. Is it cheesy? Is it fluffy? And it just so happened that the question was asked as I was doing some research around this. And of course, if we go back to the UN's acknowledgement of happiness and making this day a thing, which goes, I'm sure you know this anyway, that goes all the way back to 2012. But it wasn't just about cheesy grins for them. This was about economic, environmental, and social. And you layer that into an organisation. So they almost take their pestle and start putting what they can be doing around happiness against those elements. They won't all work within an organisation, but suddenly it starts to gain some momentum. And we also know that it's actually serious research now into happiness. It's not just a word. There's some real level of importance to it that's been levied about how it's required in the workplace, both as being the right thing to do, but also performance and productivity.
We've talked about how happiness is helpful and maybe necessary for leaders, but also if as a leader you are happy or can show happiness or show actions that demonstrate your happiness, that also then infects the team, of course, because it resonates into the team. You're modeling behaviors. And it's also, I guess, it is helpful for building trust as well, because you're effectively, as a leader, modeling that you are prioritizing happiness. If you're doing things that make you happy and saying these are important and it's necessary, you're modeling that to them. You're basically showing that you care about their happiness too, because if you care about your own happiness, generally you're going to be doing things that also are going to make the team happy. You're showing empathy, you're showing you care, you're showing authenticity, all of the things. We've discussed all of these attributes as so important. And actually maybe happiness, or an ability to embrace happiness, like maybe that's better phrased, is effectively only possible if you are also embracing all those other things like empathy, modeling good behavior, caring and authenticity, and the vulnerability as well, because it's showing a reflective element in terms of you are being a human being going, what is it that makes me happy? And you have to sort of turn in on yourself a little bit when you do that. And there is a vulnerable element to, especially admitting it to other people. You're telling other people what makes you happy is also showing there are places of vulnerability there. So I came across a guy called Rohit Dev, who essentially calls himself sort of a commercial happiness guru, and he works with organizations to increase happiness. And he's got a thing called the Happiness Playbook, and I'll put that in the links as well. I haven't managed to read all of the stuff that he talks about, but just the idea, again, that there's a consultant who goes around with organizations to increase happiness. And so therefore your friend, no, it's not cheesy at all to have happiness as a role in their title. I think it's really evolved of an organization, as long as it isn't just a sort of ticking box element, but there is a real interest and need to increase and pay attention and have that as a sort of lived value rather than just a value, I think, as we've said, that goes on a mouse
Absolutely.
map.
I love the idea of Rohit Dev. I'm going to go looking at that straight away afterwards. Slightly more corporate looking, which I don't really, is not my forte, but I came across a psychologist called Martin Seligman, and he's got this acronym for leaders. And before I say it, I'm absolutely with you on the point, Bridge, that in order for any of what I'm about to say make any sense or to land in an organisation, the leader has to have done their work, has to have done their inner work, so that it doesn't look fake, it doesn't look cheesy, it doesn't look like they're just going through the motions. And the things that Martin Seligman says, that the acronym is PERMA. P for positive emotions, E for engagement, R for relationships, M for meaning, A for accomplishment. All things that we've said a little bit about. And again, these are things that can engender happiness. So the positive emotions, appreciation, recognition, encouragement. Again, a leader needs to be really authentic when they're saying they appreciate you, when they're saying thank you, when they're asking how you are, and really mean it. Engagement. So again, for some, especially in this workplace, that like a positive workplace, I don't know about you, but things which are challenging, the work's meaningful, being given some autonomy because you are trusted, some level of creativity, all of that can elicit the things that we actually want, which we could use in the wider term happiness. Relationships, you've mentioned the word trust, collaboration, open, transparent communications. We all know how difficult some organisations find some of these things, but those things will bring people comfort and contentment and happiness because they will get that sense of belonging, which we've also talked about before. Meaning, I quite like, because again, how many organisations we know that have a vision, have a mission, but struggle for that to be compelling, to make it make sense to every single person who's working in the organisation. I think that they get very audacious, quite ambitious, and people don't know where they sit in that. That brings discontentment. So I think for me, when I was looking at this list, that is the trickiest of creating that articulation that everybody can get behind. And then the final one, accomplishment, first and foremost, setting clear goals and then providing the feedback and the resources they need to actually do it. And then celebrating. So they were all corporate type words, but they can bring happiness. So PERMA.
Yeah, a huge part of all of those elements is this idea of connection. And, we talked about Sydney Gerard in a previous episode. He's a psychologist who had said that 85% of happiness comes from human connection. And I do think that it's actually making genuine connections where there's trust and there is empathy and care and love. We've been talking about love recently, and those things are so important that often are, I guess, missing or not recognized as important, that this need for us to be recognized, valued, to understand our place in the world or in the organization, to have the things that we do or achieve celebrated by other people. I think that this idea of connection and sort of real connection rather than just on Facebook or, on social media or follows or whatever, but actual genuine connection are really, really fundamental to happiness. And so therefore, in terms of leadership, that's why communication is so important. And it does come in this massive circle to all of the things that we are regularly discussing, that without so many elements of connection, very little is really, really achievable.
I agree. And the other way I'd put it is the joining of the dots. I know we use there's the jargon term of golden thread, but when I think about that one where I feel that it's tricky to draw everybody in for an organisation, this is my personal experience or personal opinion of these things. But so often you'll see an organisation that says customer first. that's so far removed. Now, whilst that might be absolutely right that they want to engage with their customer because that's where they go, the connection comes from all of those people in the organisation that will get you to customer first. And I sometimes think that those are the steps that are missing. That if the people in the organisation hear and feel that the only people that matter are the customer, where does that leave them? They need to be better connected to their leaders for what they are doing to get them to where the organisation needs to go.
Absolutely. I think that when we may have touched on this before, that, you know, the people that work in your organisation are the interface with the customer. And how can the customer have a really genuinely good experience or feel that the organisation cares if the people that they are interfacing with are unhappy, not trusted, and not experiencing the values that are purported to be
Ones for the customers,
or the objectives that are purported to be delivered by the organisation.
Absolutely.
So, do you have a quote
I do,
for us,
and I'm going to go all the way back to Socrates for this one.
Crikey.
It was a little time before I was born, but anyway, here we go. The secret of happiness, you see, is not found in seeking more, but in developing the capacity to enjoy less.
Nice one.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bobby.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. We're at another milestone because next week it's the last episode of season 2. We're going to be talking about how we deal with differing opinions and step into that wild territory of disagreement. So come and join us for Being a Navigator.